Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a somewhat unexpected game from a very unexpected designer. Soul Raiders is a highly narrative, story-driven, cooperative fantasy adventure game designed by none other than Marc-Andre and published by One for All, who helped sponsor this video. Now, as you might know, Marc-Andre is the designer responsible for a little game called Splendor. But how does a game like this embrace the simplicity and elegance of his design philosophy? Well, let's take a look at the game, and hopefully I'll be able to explain that along the way. I have the game set up here, and as you can see, it starts out with a pretty modest footprint. But believe me, that will change as you play. And remember, this is a prototype, so the final game components may be different. Also, keep in mind that this is a demo scenario, so none of what you see in this video is going to spoil any of the main story from the full game. This is literally a prologue meant to be a tutorial for how to play. On the far right, we have the story cards and the scripted enemies. These are both stacks of numerically ascending cards that will be triggered throughout the game. Your decisions and the route you choose to explore will sometimes call for specific events or enemies to be drawn and resolved. Both of these are a big part of how the game delivers its narrative. The location cards, or more like sheets, are stacked here. These represent the environments that you'll move around and explore. Each one is beautifully illustrated and has two sides. In most cases, they'll start on side A, but some events or your decisions will typically result in them being flipped to their B side, which may be a similar scene, but a little different. More and more locations will be revealed as you play through the scenario, or chapter as they call it. And keep in mind that this demo only has 9 location cards, whereas the full game's typical chapter is going to have something more like 40. This stack also has sheets that provide an introduction and setup for the chapter, as well as a summary of its victory conditions. In the middle here, we have a stack of random enemy cards and an assortment of tokens that are used throughout the game. And finally, the main game board here on the left. This has a few different areas, and most of them are tracks of some kind that will evolve over time and very much have a persistent impact on the game. Around the outside of the board is the vitae track. This is where the group's collective vitae, or health, is tracked. For this scenario, it starts on space 15. Inside the upper right is the exhaustion track. This dictates how many cards each player draws at the beginning of a round. It's also connected to the vitae. So as you round the end of the vitae track, you're going to become more and more exhausted, drawing fewer and fewer cards. And if you get to the very end of the exhaustion track, you lose the game. The last track you'll see is the threat track. This is going to increase for a variety of reasons, and as it does, it will affect how much vitae you'll lose in some instances, as well as the number of enemies that spawn. And like the exhaustion track, you will lose the game if you reach the end of the threat track. And there are 2 spaces for event cards. You'll never know how or when they'll be triggered until they are. And every player will have a hero board and a deck of cards specific to their hero, as well as a miniature that will represent their hero out on the locations. Now, I don't know if these miniatures are standard, but the ones they've included here are very nice. Now, early on in the rulebook they sent us, I read a single sentence that grabbed my attention. And I think it really speaks to the key philosophy of what this game is trying to do. It says, in Soul Raiders, you may complete an action or not. There is no notion of success or failure. And instead of walking you through each phase of the game, I think it's more important that you understand how the game's core mechanisms support that claim. While this is a fantasy adventure where you'll be exploring locations, fighting enemies, and completing various tasks, all of that is built around hand management first and foremost, with a little on-the-fly deck building. You want to move from one location to another? Play some cards to do so. Are you engaged with enemies? Defeat them with cards. Even when faced with a unique task like interrogating a goblin, you'll look to your cards to see if you can. Because again, you're never going to try to interrogate that goblin. You're going to be able to look at your hand of cards and know whether you can or you can't. Here's how they work. Each hero deck has a variety of cards, all of which have some common qualities, but each also have some specialization or effect. Let's take a look at a sample hand of 4 cards to help explain. All cards have a number on the top half. These values can be used in and of themselves for any type of action in the game. The symbol in the middle and the bottom half of each card offer bonuses when taking the associated type of action, or in the case of spells, an instant or ongoing effect instead of the value at the top. Let's run through a few examples with the same exact hand of cards to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. At this location, moving through this door to location 2 requires a value of 4. Luckily, I have this movement card for a base value of 2, plus its bonus of another 2 for each movement card, including itself. I would then reveal location 2, placing it on the table and placing my hero miniature on it, and continuing with my actions. But let's go back to that other room and take a different route. Rather than the door, what if we wanted to go down these steps to explore location 9? This is going to take a value of 8, so that movement card by itself won't be enough. I can add these 2 cards to the action in order to make up the difference, but forfeiting everything on them aside from their base values. Now I have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is enough. We reveal location 9, place our hero on it, and we find out we've got some enemies spawning here whenever a hero enters. These are the types of things you're going to need to consider as a player and as a group as you play your cards to take your actions. I just spent most of my cards to get to this location, and now I only have 1 left to deal with these enemies. Let's imagine I'm faced with these 2 enemies spawning as I enter. Thankfully, my last card is a combat card, so its bonus will be in effect. This combat action would amount to 6 total, 2 for the base value, and another 2 for each of the engaged enemies. I'd need a total of 7 in order to defeat both of them, but I'll just have to settle for getting rid of one of them now and deal with the other's attack during the reaction phase this round. And these are just a couple of examples of how you can sort of puzzle your cards together in order to do the things that you're choosing to do with your actions. Plus, you'll want to puzzle this out as a group too, as players don't have to stick together and can be dealing with all sorts of different tasks and challenges practically at the same time. And that brings up the other big design philosophy in this game. There are no real turns as players are taking their actions. As a group, you can discuss and decide all the different things you want to do and plan that out together, or you don't even have to do that. I could be engaged with enemies at one location, while you're off at another trying to pick a locked passageway at the same time. It really is a different experience than what you'd expect from a fantasy adventure. There are, of course, a lot more details and mechanisms in the game, but that hand management and how you use your cards to power your actions is the really big takeaway here. Aside from that, you'll be able to add new cards to your deck, sometimes at just the right moment, providing what almost feels like combo opportunities. There are variable hero bonuses, making them well suited for specific tasks. There are also enemy abilities to consider. Location reaction effects that will spawn more enemies or maybe increase the threat level. You get the picture. This game is like many games in this genre, but at the same time, unlike any of them. To find out more, be sure to check out their campaign, but if you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. I will try to answer every single one. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.